Recording in
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome in. Welcome to Tuesdays and Thursdays with CarePatrol. Welcome, everyone. Welcome. I hope it's pretty where you are. It's a little overcast here, a little cold. I can't seem to get warm. I hope you're having a better day. Hello, Charity. Thank you for being here, as always. And all of you, thank you for being here. If you're new, this is Tuesdays and Thursdays with CarePatrol. 6 times a month, we get together and provide live CEUs via Zoom. So these count towards your live CEU credits when you go to turn them in. Today, we also have the hey, Holly, hey, Artidra, nice to see y'all. Thank you for being here. Admitting some more folks in. So today is Tuesdays and Thursdays with CarePatrol. It's a live CEU, and it also today is an ethics CEU. So anyone needing to provide an ethics CEU today will meet that requirement. We're glad you tuned in. Just admitting some more folks as we get together here. Hello, Daphne. Hello, Cassandra. Thank y'all for speaking. Welcome in. Welcome everyone to Tuesdays and Thursdays with CarePatrol. CarePatrol is a senior placement service. I own the business and I am the program director for these CEUs, which we've been doing now for almost 12 months come April. CarePatrol is a senior placement agency. And what that means is that we find folks who are in need of advice and or providers and help them understand what their options are, much like you would do as a social worker or even as a nurse. And then like a realtor, we drive them around and show them communities of interest if community placement is what's needed. And all of this is never invoiced to them. It's at no charge to the folks we help. We're paid by the providers. And the obvious question should be on your mind, well, do you work with every provider? And the answer is yes, we work with every provider. However, we are not paid by every provider. So we sometimes place residents in communities where we can expect no commission, but it's the right thing to do. And that's what we live by. Hello, Emily. Hello, Katrina. Thank everyone for speaking and using the chat room. I hope you'll use it more and more as a place to communicate ideas and share resources and just generally get to know each other as we continue, I think, to develop a little community here, for which I'm most grateful. Very grateful for your attendance. So let's get into some housekeeping if we can. If I can get the screen to change. So all of your phones and your Zoom microphones are muted. If you need to ask questions, please use the chat room. I do keep an eye on it, and I will interrupt myself and ask your question when you ask it. And certainly if you hear a question or see a question rather in the chat room and you know the answer, please feel free to weigh in, particularly if your experience could be helpful to the person who's posing the question. So I want y'all to use this as a resource for one another, as well as, you know, a vehicle to discuss the CEU in question. In order to get the continuing education unit hour, you have to be participating for 40 minutes of the 55, meaning that we close this down at 12:20. So if you try and admit after 12:20 in the future and you can't get in, please understand. We're abiding by the regulations of both the Social Work Board for the state of Alabama and the Nursing Board for the state of Alabama. We're credentialed by both for 1.2 nursing hours and 1.0 social work hour for this presentation and all presentations. In order to get the presentation, or rather in order to get the evaluation or the certificate, you have to get, which is a paper certificate that we email digitally to both nurses and social workers. In order to get it, you must complete the evaluation using SurveyMonkey. I know some of you are calling in by phone. If you're ready, I'll give you the address for SurveyMonkey for you to use after this presentation to evaluate me and the content and qualify for your contact hour. And the SurveyMonkey address is https:// www.surveymonkey.com/lowercase r/uppercase H, B as in boy, L, D as in David, F, M, L. And one more time for y'all. Yes, ma'am, Mrs. Bridges. So generally, states have a reciprocal agreement between one another so that the Board of Social Work in Alabama, in all likelihood, has a reciprocal agreement with the board in Mississippi, so that if you moved here from Mississippi and began practicing, Alabama would then take the hours you earned in Mississippi and apply them to Alabama and vice versa. That's the reason they have that reciprocal agreement, and it should be enforced in Mississippi. But the way to know that would be to obviously contact your board. But I'm confident that it will be approved in Mississippi as it is in Alabama. So the SurveyMonkey address, one last time for those by phone, is https://www.surveymonkey.com/lowercase r/uppercase H, B as in boy, L, D as in David, F, M, L. That is our SurveyMonkey link today. I believe Charity had put that in the Zoom chat room for any of you who may be looking for it still. And evaluations are done by 5. And I asked that so that we can get our certificates out this afternoon or this evening. And sometimes y'all know it's midnight, but get the certificates out to you today so that you have them and you're not having to fret about where they might be or what they are. So we'll get on with the presentation. Again, it's Tuesdays and Thursdays with CarePatrol. We're doing today a live CEU, and it's an ethics CEU, and it is on working ethically with the elderly. We have 3 objectives today in this presentation, and you'll be evaluating me on whether I met them, whether we met them today in our discussion. One is we want to discuss just major ethical principles, just in the general sense, unrelated to healthcare or in any way, anything else really other than itself. In objective 2, then, we want to discuss some elements of decision-making capacity, and I think you'll see as we discuss this why this is important. And we'll go quite on and on about that. And then lastly, we'll define ageism, which you may already sort of intuitively know what it means, and its impact upon clinical practice. So those are our objectives. And please, as again, had issues with speakers, what is the passcode for the survey? Chastity. Let me go back one, y'all. Sorry to go back. It is chastity. If you're listening, the passcode is https://www.surveymonkey.com/lowercase r/all uppercase H, B as in boy, L, D as in David, F, M, L. And it just occurred to me, you might be asking about the CEU code word, and we don't give that out until later in the presentation because we want to ensure that folks are, in fact, staying and listening. And it's not so much that I need to make sure of that, it's that the boards of social work and nursing need to have verification that this is the case. So in ethics terminology, we want to just very, in a broad sense, address, well, what are ethics? Well, ethics, depending on any number of definitions you may encounter, basically comes down to it's a system or a concept of what is right and wrong and the justification of it and the defense of it by an ethicist or someone who's putting forward that ethical idea or truism in their eye. Now, bioethics is that it's a determination of what's right and what's wrong, but it's applied more narrowly to life and death issues, in fact, in healthcare. And then when one encounters an ethical dilemma, that would be coming upon a situation in which both alternatives are unsatisfactory. Excuse me for eating ice. So in just general major ethical principles, in really every ethical concept or system, there exists the right to autonomy or self-determination, which is, in a sense, the ability to think for oneself, make decisions for oneself, decide what happens to oneself. It is the freedom to act, to be, to exist. Justice is just the obligation of fairness to each of these persons, autonomous, who are free to act. Beneficence, which we discuss in healthcare, is the duty to act for the benefit of others. And someone who is beneficent would be someone who is said to be doing good. Mother Teresa is someone who is beneficent. Non-maleficence is not necessarily, in my mind, the opposite of beneficence. I think it's a different shade of the same meaning. Perhaps it's the other side of the same coin. Non-maleficence, instead of saying do good, says do no harm. And in our case, what we're saying is we're going to protect our patient to whom we've sworn an oath that we're not going to do harm to them. We're going to protect them from doing harm to themselves, either in a decision they make or in some other way. Veracity, which is necessary really in every discussion of ethics, and it's necessary, I believe, in every relationship, and most certainly necessary in the patient and clinician relationship. So trustworthiness, veracity simply means truth. It's Latin. Then what we're going to talk about a little bit later is the substituted judgment standard, in which we seek a surrogate decision maker. This is the substituted judgment standard. And then there's the best interest standard, in which we might employ or act in tandem with our substituted surrogate to base on what the family or provider decides is best. This is the best interest, what is best for the patient. These are basic ethical principles that we'll encounter as we dig a little deeper today. So you who are nurses know what your oath states in your code of ethics, just as you who are social workers knows what is the truth or what is the code for social workers. And the American Nurses Association states, the ethical tradition of nursing is self-reflective, enduring, and distinctive. A code of ethics makes explicit the primary goals, values, and obligations of the profession. The Code of Ethics by the National Association of Social Workers says, these values, principles, and standards guide social workers' conduct. The code is relevant to all social workers and social work students, regardless of their professional functions, the settings in which they work, or the populations they serve. I say this for a point. I know many of you do not work in elder care. You work in other settings. You work with children. You work with inmates. You work with folks who suffer from mental health issues. You work in other capacities. But I want to make clear that understanding how ageism might affect you in that is a duty in a way. And I commend you for being here today and learning more about this topic, because it's clear to me, because of your attendance, that you take that duty seriously. So I thank you. One thing I want to ask before I get too deep into that is, how many of you, and you can use the chat room to answer, but how many of you received any sort of geriatric training in school? Or have you been dependent more on things like this continuing education to find information. I think in looking at the literature on ethics and aging people in healthcare, there's very little literature. It's really a topic that's understudied, I believe, and undertaught. But there are articles. In fact, it seems there's a movement to teach geriatric care more in nursing school and med school and social work school. But it looks like here, those of you who've answered have been tutored and educated by someone far greater at it than me on the issues of elder care, and I'm glad to hear that. Chastity, thank you for letting us know that. So I just included here these two codes of ethics. One is nursing and one is social work. And I want to read some of the provisions of some of them. So provision 1 under the nursing says, the nurse in all professional relationships practices with compassion and respect for the inherent dignity, worth, and uniqueness of every individual, unrestricted by considerations of social or economic status, personal attributes, or the nature of health problems. And the social work code says something similar in a different way, which is social workers respect the inherent dignity and worth of the person. And so in both codes of ethics, in both oaths, all of you are sworn then, as you know, to treat the person in front of you with inherent dignity. Provision 2, the nurse's primary commitment is to the patient, whether an individual, family, group, or community, but to the patient, an individual. And what I think here is that social workers recognize the central importance of human relationships. I'm bringing this out because these are points I want to bring forward, obviously, as we talk. Provision 5, the nurse owes the same duties to self as to others, including the responsibility to preserve integrity and safety, to maintain competence, and to continue personal and professional growth. Social workers practice within their area of experience and develop and enhance their professional expertise. And the nurse participates in the advancement of the profession through contributions to practice, education, administration, and knowledge development. Whereas the social workers look as a primary goal to help people in need and address social problems. I think these statements are parallel. And the reason I bring them up once again is for effect as we get further into what we're discussing today. I've been through the code and why these are relevant, I think, and making the point that you owe it to yourselves to provide yourselves with the same empathy and dignity as your patient. You have a right to your personal values, but in this relationship, your professional ethics must override it. And how would we then go about making an ethical decision? Well, one way is to collect and analyze the data, state the dilemma. This is all a matter of course in healthcare. Consider choices of action. What does this sound like? Analyze advantages and disadvantages, make a decision. I think I've let everyone in, Alexis. I'm sorry to have not done so. Everyone who's just joining us, it's Tuesdays and Thursdays with CarePatrol. It's a live CEU. It's an ethics CEU. We're talking about working ethically with the elderly. We've talked about various sort of macro ethical principles and values. And now we're looking at how do we take those and make a decision. And what I'm getting at here with make a decision, evaluate the effectiveness, this is informed consent. So the same issue or process by which you would confront an ethical dilemma is the same issue and process by which you would confront informed consent. Therefore, informed consent is the ethical dilemma with the aging. Does that make sense? Let's go a little further. We know that clinical work with older adults is complex for a lot of reasons. But one of which is that there's an interplay of factors, including age, quite frankly, issues that are specific to late life, in their cohort, what their cohorts are doing. And then we also look at, again, we've talked about this many times, the generations that are aging now. The one that's currently aging in its 80s is the silent generation. And so we need to take into consideration that these people have different values than do we. And we need to try and honor those values when we address them. And by doing so, we will gain a deeper sense of trust from them, and we will then be able to be a better clinician for them. You can see all of the issues. I won't read the PowerPoint to you, but polypharmacy and comorbidity are just among a few of the issues affecting the older population, aging population. And let me say this now. The new word, apparently, for elderly, it's now politically correct to say aging adult. I don't remember to do that much, so forgive me for breaking political correctness. But aging adult is a wonderful term, and it does, I think, better incorporate a stage in life, which is you are still aging. You are an adult, clearly, and you still have something to offer. You're still living, you're still doing, being, participating. So let's go down to the Holy Grail, which is, as I discussed, informed consent. So we just went through this in how we determine an ethical decision. We talk about the nature of the procedure, the risk and benefits, the alternatives, the risk and benefits of the alternatives. And then we have to be clear that the patient understands those. And then we move on. Can they make a choice or not? Do they understand and appreciate the circumstances in which they currently find themselves? The issues that are confronting them that you have, detailed, are they able to process the information? Sometimes you encounter someone who is in maybe a moderate stage or even a mild stage of dementia. My mother is like this, and you may ask a question and they look at you in such a way that it's clear they have no idea what you just said. It's almost as if they need you to speak slower, but that's not the case. It's their ability to understand the question. I'm sure you have encountered this in the past. So they have to be able to rationally work with the information that you're giving them, understand the question, and then make a decision. Can they do so? And the age-related factors that you need to make allowance for are they someone who has hearing or visual impairment? Do they otherwise have impaired communication or verbal or written skills? In this case, you may be thinking about someone, for example, who's has a stroke or had a stroke and has not a great ability to be understood when speaking and can no longer write because it affected their dominant hand. So you have to make some allowance then for this person, because otherwise, even though they present in one way as being, in a sense, incapable, they're very capable mentally of understanding what you're saying. And this is where you have to sort of put aside your values and try and incorporate their beliefs and your professional code of ethics. And what I mean here, maybe an example would be like me, I'm someone who values efficiency. So I like to do things quickly. I like, if someone asks me to do something, I try and do it immediately and just do it. That's sort of been, my thing. Now, if that approach to life, doesn't work when I'm encountering elderly patients. In fact, that would be counterproductive. I have to be the opposite of that. Yes, I value efficiency. And no, this person is not telling me in an efficient way what's going on, but it is my goal here to build trust. So I'm going to listen, even though it really bothers me not to just get to the point. Does that make sense? And so I've got to put aside my personal value, which is I'm efficient and I help people in an efficient way, and put it aside and say, professionally, this person has to have the ability to make their wishes known to me. And I've got to slow down and allow that to happen. And then the other age-related factor may be fluctuating or diminishing capacity. This could be someone who you see over time who seems to diminish in capacity due to some sort of cognitive dysfunction that's going on. Or it could be someone, maybe if you're in the hospital, in the ER, and you have someone who's yelling out and paranoid and hallucinating, and you recognize the person is not normally this way. They're in the middle of some sort, probably, of infection like a UTI. And that as soon as we get a day or two of antibiotics in them, they'll return to their calm, rational, reasonable self. And so, informed consent has to take into consideration this person with the UTI. Can they make informed consent? Or conversely, can they refuse treatment? And you have the right to refuse your treatment, even if it hastens death, but the same markers apply. Oh, I have a comment. Let me stop myself from talking and see what. Oh, Charity's, I think it was a message to me, or I would have read it aloud. I appreciate your advice, Charity. She wants me to make sure I'm not infringing on patients' rights. And I think that's true in every setting. And I appreciate your conscientiousness for bringing that to my attention. Thank you. The right to refuse treatment. Now, we also have to understand, can this person make a choice, understand the issue, approach the information, and manipulate it in such a way to form an idea, which is the decision, which is coherent. I'm having connection issues and keep getting, okay, I'll keep letting you in, Aisha. Thank you for letting me know. And then we talk about advanced directive. This is the Patient Self-Determination Act. And you know this, you live it each day. All adults should receive written information about their care. They should be asked if they have an advanced directive. There should be policies maintained within the clinic, office, healthcare setting, whatever it may be, around this discussion and the living will. It must be non-discriminatory. And we will, and I want to make this point for y'all here, the durable power of attorney for healthcare, we will be discussing in April. And I have a very good lineup. I think I sent it out last week, and I want y'all to be aware that next April will be money and law month. So it will be how to pay for care and the legal issues around elder care. So we're going to discuss Medicaid, Medicare, powers of attorney, law 101, elder law 101, reverse mortgages, how to pay for care, lots of things. And so I'm glossing over this today in preparation for April, and we'll resume on April 5th. Thank you, Nicole, for saying that's going to be exciting. I'm excited about it. So in decision-making capacity, I'm hammering this point because it's important, competency and other things. So competency is something that's determined by a judge. It's not something that is determined in any other way. It's not a judgment you can make, in other words. It's in a court of law, and it's whether someone is legally fit to do something such as sign a contract. Now, all of us as adults are presumed competent to make healthcare decisions. And so again, it's not a question for you to make this judgment. All adults are deemed competent. Competency is a legal definition, and it's very clear. I just want to be clear about that. In decision-making capacity, we want to look at this person's ability to be specific versus global. In general sense, if you have any type of cognitive impairment, whether this be through injury, stroke, disease, debility, Alzheimer's, whatever, that's a hard no. We have to determine that you do not have the capacity to give consent or to refuse treatment. Now, for some people, this could fluctuate. Again, this might be the person whose health improves and then declines, is in and out of lucid states. This would be a very gray area, but there's no standard. This is why it's a gray area. There is no standard for determining capacity. You all know this. We've discussed some tools 1 or 2 weeks ago, but there's no gold standard. Holly, I've not received an email about the classes we're always able to sign up on the CarePatrol website. The April links are not yet posted. I'll do that today. And then you can sign up for April on the website. And I will send out a letter as well, because here it is all of a sudden at the end of the month, if you can believe it, at the end of March. Yeah, thank you for asking that question, Holly. So in decision-making capacity, verification is required. You must verify that someone can give informed consent or refuse treatment. And they must have the ability to do so. So they must have some ability to voice a choice. And this, of course, can be written, but in the example I gave earlier, then you're in a gray area. You have to give them adequate disclosure, and you have to believe that they understand what you're saying, that they could recall it, repeat it back to you, that they could use that information, weigh the consequences, good and bad, of the treatment and the alternatives, appreciate what the outcome could be, good and bad, from all, and then make an informed decision or consent. And it's voluntary, as you know. I hammered the point of consent because this is really, it can be the beginning of a discussion with someone, but it also, I think, is the area in which we have the most room for error in dealing with aging folks. And just to give you a sense of what ageism is, it is assuming that what applies to the older adult also applies to the younger, and vice versa. And it would be detrimental in cases of like pharmacy, for example, to make and work from that assumption, as it would to assume the measures on young adults are the same. Both the data and measures change as we age. Another, I think, huge mistake that I and others make is, or that I no longer make this mistake, but some may, is assuming that chronological age is relevant, or that it's always relevant. I've known this for a while. The people I help range in age from 62 to 92. What binds them in seeking assisted living is not their age, but their health needs, their abilities to perform ADLs. So they may be functionally the same at 62 and 82 because they lack the capacity to perform the same ADLs. Now, chronologically, they're much different. And so we can't assume that chronological age is relevant. Nor can we make the mistake of saying that age is explanatory. Oh, thank you, Alice, for putting in the code word. I will get to that for you on the phone in a minute. Actually, let's interrupt myself. The code word today is ageism. It's from this slide, and it's spelled like on the slide. For those of you on the phone, ageism is spelled capital A-G-E-I-S-M. Ageism. Again, that's the code word and the password. So when you go to the SurveyMonkey link, you will not be able to enter the link without putting in the password, which is capital A-G-E-I-S-M. And then one of the questions within the survey, once you get it opened, is ageism. So remember that the password and the code word are the same thing. Code word is ageism. So we don't want to assume that because someone's aging that they're going to show a decline. That's not true. People who change, for example, who quit smoking can see an instant, immediate impact on the lowering of their risk for heart attack. Now, they can quit smoking at 68 after smoking for 50 years and see some measurable health benefit. So let's not suggest that because someone's 78 and they've always smoked, they might as well keep smoking. And then we always, or not always, since we sometimes, all of us is what I meant to say, all of us sometimes may be using, without knowing, ageist language, like elderly or senior. I mean, again, these are not the correct terms anymore. Let's talk about this and give you all something to write about in the chat room. So we have a patient who's elderly. What's the first thing that might come to your mind? Would it be the bias that that person is frail? And if someone's frail, do we make a judgment about them? If they're old, they must be frail. If they're frail, I must protect them. So what conflicts might arise out of your need to protect the frail elderly in conflict with your need, for example, to give informed consent to either the elderly person or the family? So can our bias of ageism and elderliness affect our truth-telling to the family? Has anybody encountered a situation like this? Looks like a no. Let's try two. Anyone, and I've seen this before in the chat room, if you live to be 80, you deserve to be able to do what you want. And what did we just say? If you quit smoking at 80, we will see an immediate impact on the lowering of your risk for heart attack and stroke. Now, if you're 80, that ought to be appealing, don't you think? And yet, because we've decided, well, heck, he's 80, he may not have much longer to live. He likes cigarettes, let him keep smoking. No, our duty is to the patient. To the patient, not to our personal value of, oh, look at the cute old man smoking, and what we think, oh, well, they might as well keep smoking, God bless them. No, we have a duty to them to intervene if we can, to educate and to promote good health. And this is, that's but one example of many elderly folks. You may have the person who is on the borderline of diabetic, and you can have a conversation with them about not eating processed food, not eating the sweets that they eat every day from Dunkin' Donuts with the coffee with 1,000 calories. We can collectively and individually help promote the health of our elders by releasing our bias of, oh, we'll let them do what they want. We're getting no takers in the chat room, y'all. You're letting me down. Here's one that some of you may have been present with if you work in a hospital setting. Two family members, either side of mom's bed. Mom is dying. Mom knows she is dying. She's been given the alternatives, the risk and the benefits of each, as has the family. And one child says, we can't just let mom die. And the other child says, mom would not have wanted to live like this. So we have very diametrically opposing attitudes about a very sensitive statement or subject, which is mom's life. And yet, have we asked mom? Thank you, Holly. You have to honor the wishes of the patient mother. That's where I'm going. How do we determine the autonomy and the self-determination of the competent dying person be upheld and preserved? How do we determine that? We go to Holly and we ask, just as she did. Other ageism biases might be this. Do we routinely screen for depression when encountering the elderly? For functional change or cognitive changes? Or do we wait? Do we look at their labs and see them as elderly and think that, well, I'd be unhappy too if I didn't have much to do, instead of screening them? Anyone have ever been in a setting where you heard a nurse say to another nurse or a social worker or someone else say to a family, well, I don't understand Medicare. I don't know how this gets paid or something. Or, they may say, oh, they want to send you to the nursing home, or they send people when they can't find somewhere else for them to go. So these are not only inappropriate and rude statements, but they also fly in the face of our oath to empower and enhance our knowledge of certain subjects. So if this is you, and you need to educate yourself on certain things to be a better advocate and clinician for your patient, then own that. And then I think we talked about earlier, someone may be big in that situation with mom. We've honored her. We've asked her what her wishes are, and yet a very dominant voice within the family, maybe the husband, would persuade us to prolong mom's life, even though it's against her wishes. Would we go along with that husband or not? And what did we say about our ethical decision-making capacity? It all comes back to, can the patient make the decision? Can they give informed consent? And have we honored them in this process and adhered to our oath, our professional code? The MacArthur Foundation did a study. What about when you have a factor in lack of placement resources or the financial resources of the patient, Holly? Well, those are two things, Holly, that we cannot change. The thing that we can change in dealing with the elderly is us, our bias and the way we approach them and the way that we care for them. We cannot change the lack of providers in our system. We cannot change the lack of resources that the family possesses. We cannot change those things. And those are ethical decisions on a grand scale for us as a society. They are not ethical or appropriate in this case. Our case is to the what is and what is best. But the MacArthur Foundation said there were 6 myths about aging. To be old is to be sick. We all know the story of the 90-year-old who still drives herself to church and to her garden club and bridge meeting and doesn't take any pills. So we know that's not true. We infer that, we have that bias, but it's not true for everyone. Therefore, it's not true. Myth number 2 is this notion that we have as a society that you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but you very certainly can. And I go back to my example of smoking. That old dog can learn the trick of vaping, for example, or of chewing gum, or of finding some other habit to occupy themselves. And the same is true with the horses out of the barn. Just because you smoke for 60 years doesn't mean you can't quit now for the next 20 years of your life and see immeasurable benefit. The biggest myth, perhaps, is that the secret to being successful as you age and healthy is all about your parents and your DNA. And we know from research that this only turns out to be true about 30% of the time. In fact, 70% of the time, we see that people through healthy lifestyle choices do not exhibit signs that are present in their DNA. If any of you have ever done a 23andMe or Ancestry.com and opted for the health benefit, which I have done both, by the way, it tells you, well, I have a predilection for diabetes, which I do not have, and for heart disease and high blood pressure. I do not have heart disease, I have high blood pressure. So I don't have some of the things that my DNA would suggest. And I do have high blood pressure, which is really environmental in many ways, and so, as well as DNA related. So the other myth is that the lights are on, but no one's home, or the lights are dim. And that's simply not true. I would ask you to look at yourself here. Do you know more today about the world around you and about yourself and your place in it and what you deem to be right and wrong than you did this time last year? What about 2 years ago? What about 20 years ago? People, as they age, you know this, you look in the mirror, or I do, and I see a 30-year-old. I'm 55, I'll be 55 on Thursday. I see a 30-year-old. The 30-year-old isn't there anymore. It's physically, but mentally it is. I'm the same, and so are the aging adults. That yes, they look 80, and they are 80, but connect to them emotionally and mentally like they're on your level, and you'll see a big difference in how you come about it. Well, thank you, Sarah. I appreciate you telling me about the happy birthday. That was sweet. And the elderly don't pull their own weight. Well, we've all seen the greeter at Walmart, and we all know that Walmart would prefer that greeter to be elderly, because we know that those folks are going to show up on time, for example, because promptness is a virtue in that generation. They're going to give you a full day's work. Again, it's a generational thing. So I think companies, private companies, are showing us that, socially, that the elderly do very much pull their own weight. But these are things that I ask you to ask yourself. Are you someone who may ever have this cross your mind when the elderly or aging adult comes to you? So we want to say that we've talked about our oath and the Hippocratic oaths, and there are some limits to them. And limits is maybe not the right word. Let's say nuances. In each of these instances where a patient has presented to us and we've sought informed consent, we've had the option to go about this discussion in different ways. I would suggest that you look at these ways and find if there's some similarity in what you're doing and if there might be room for change. Again, our first case study was a little elderly person. We assumed that person was frail, that we needed to rescue that person based on that assumption, which was ageism, and that we had to withhold possibly information because they just couldn't understand or couldn't process. If we approach them like that, we're approaching them in a paternalistic relationship, which means, you know what paternalism means. It's where the male dominant culture tells you what to do, or the father tells you what to do. And it's where the clinician decides on behalf of the patient. You're being told what to do. The patient is completely passive in the relationship. Interpretive relationship would be one in which you try and at least first discern the patient's goals or reason for being there, let's say, and then try and offer some options that meet that. Patient's still passive in that sense, but you're coming closer to addressing them in a way that doesn't incorporate an age bias. There's the informative relationship in which you might provide information and then without swaying the patient, allow them to make a decision. Well, I mean, this is one in which the patient is a very active participant, but it may not be as active as we would like. Really, ultimately, what we want to see is a deliberative relationship where the patient and the clinician, you, act as equals and collaborate, work together. This is the model in which we're going to achieve healthcare goals. This is the means by which we get the 80-year-old to stop smoking. Now, we'll go a little deeper into cultural biases with the 4 sort of issues that affect, and this was when, I think it was Katrina, you asked, or I can't remember now, issues affecting the health of older persons. Lack of resources is number one. Number one, scarcity of providers, financial barriers, and cultural barriers and biases. The only one that we can change, as I mentioned, is our cultural bias. We at least most of us can affect the other, but we can change this, and it can make a significant monumental change in the lives of our patients, our aging adults. And so we can't impose the same values on the aging person as we can upon the 40-year-old. We can't stereotype, we can't fall into ageism, and we can't withhold informed consent. So these are sort of a summation of where we've been today. We know that earlier we talked about finding a surrogate. And we know that when we approach children, when we find that we have someone who we deem is not competent to give consent, we've got to deal with the children. Remember that many of these children were unawares either of their parents' sickness or the magnitude of it. So we have to be very empathetic with them, just as we do with their aging parents. We also have to realize that there may be certain elements of familial turmoil that we have to get through. And if you've ever worked with a family, this is probably truer most of the time than not. Family dynamic is the biggest barrier to what I do. I expect it is to what you do. So we just have to be in the same way that we are with the aging adult, we have to be with the children, which is to honor their values, honor their rituals. For example, if they're Greek Orthodox, we should have a minister in the room as we near the time of death, for example, a priest. We need to ask the family and specifically our client, the patient to whom we have an oath, what are their goals at this point in life? And we need to give them as much liberty to make those decisions known and heard as we can. Now, to the children and to the lucid aging adult. I like to give you all a tool, something new each week, if I can, to pass on to your clients, something that may enrich their lives. So in looking at the ethics of elderly healthcare, again, found very little to go on, unfortunately. I hope I did a passable job, but one of the things I found interesting was the legacy letter. This is a Jewish tradition. It's also called an ethical will. This is how, of course, that I ended up on Googling ethics, an ethical will. And it's essentially a document that's been processed in the Jewish tradition for 3,500 years, in which the dying person or the elder person makes their value sets known to their offspring or to those who come behind them. And while it's not necessarily an oral history or a memoir, it is in many senses a retelling of their lives, only it talks about the impact of those life events, what was learned and how it affected or came against your value set. And of course, there's nothing legal about this. It's not to be upheld by the family. It's more of a memento, a keepsake, something that I think reaches into our need for spirituality and meaning in life, and certainly in death. And if you'd like to pass on the notion of a legacy letter to one of your clients, then it's a very simple thing to do. Here's 5 easy steps. 1, you simply address the letter. Who are you writing? Is it your entire family? Is it your oldest son? Is it, your first cousin? And then you tell whomever you addressed the legacy letter to what it is that you appreciate about them, what you're grateful for about them, why you're glad they're in your life, and what you've learned from them. Then you let them know 3 things that life has taught you. Perhaps these 3 things intersect with something that is also a part of their life, perhaps not. You then ask, or then you relay very clearly of all the life experiences that you had and the values that you encountered. The one that matters most is this, and here's why. And say why it's really important and why you hope that those who come behind you will honor that value in their lives because it's had this kind of meaning and effect upon yours. And then you obviously close the letter in any other way that you might, like you would close any letter. They suggest a poem. But again, when we're dealing with the elderly, we just want to summarize that we need patience. We need empathy. So we need to try and put ourselves in their shoes. We need to put their values and their value sets over ours. And if we're ever in doubt of what to do, refer back to our professional code of ethics and do that. We have to show respect to our clients, just as we would any client, but certainly those who are of a different generation who may expect to be called sir or ma'am, for example. And then we have to be optimistic. What's the saying? Getting old ain't for sissies. It's hard. And to be back in with another ailment or a new ailment, you've got to remain optimistic and positive. This is what helps these people remain optimistic and positive themselves. And that concludes today's ethics presentation. Thank you for listening. Our address to SurveyMonkey for the evaluation is https://www.surveymmonkey.com/r/all uppercase HBLDFML. The code word is ageism. We'll be back in April with reverse mortgages on Tuesday, April 5th. 31st is Thursday. I'll be celebrating my birthday. If you remember to do so, celebrate as if it's yours along with me. And let's make March 31st a big party. Thank y'all for what you do. Thank you for listening, and thank you for referring families and clients in need to CarePatrol. Again, we're free. We'll answer questions. We'll read long-term care insurance policies. We'll detail the differences in Medicare and Medicaid and Advantage Medicare, VA benefits, whatever it may be. Thank you all for the birthday wishes. Thank you so much. Whatever it may be, we'd love to help y'all out, and we're free of charge. Thank you so much for everything you do. We appreciate y'all being here today, and we'll see. And I'll be posting I will, Tina, post the April classes today. Thank you for reminding me. Y'all have a great afternoon, and we'll see you in April.